a deafening blast.
An explosion rips apart a sidewalk in midtown, sending a chunk of concrete flying right into the air. The whole thing captured on camera, too, nearly injuring two people who stepped across just...
So this sidewalk right here that I'm standing on recently exploded with people walking right by it. And although nobody was injured, investigators still have no idea what caused this thing to blow up, which once again has critics ringing alarm bells as disasters like this are now more common than ever before.
A bustling midtown around lunchtime. New Yorkers walking around on a warm September afternoon when suddenly an explosion tears through the sidewalk.
The whole ground shook. Everything shook. We were just like shaking.
We met Yvonne Bellardo in front of her 3-story home in Bushwick, Brooklyn. Without warning, firefighters told her to get out. City inspectors had discovered the building next door was unstable and had to be demolished.
This house right here with a family who's been here for decades was forced out and now has to live in a hotel.
I just don't think it's fair.
This video inside the Queens Midtown Tunnel shows water pouring down the ceiling, showing the severity of the leak that caused the tunnel to be shut down for hours.
And the video shows even though the hole is only 2.5 inches, the force of the water in Wednesday's leak was intense. Investigators say that contractor drilled 50 feet down into the East River, then another 50 feet through the soil. That's when the drill cracked the cast iron liner above the tunnel's exhaust duct.
So all over town, things are falling down and nobody has any idea why. But what nobody's talking about is that even though stuff like this is happening more and more often, it seems like the city's doing less and less to alert residents to the dangers lurking all around them. And this all started a year ago with a massive parking garage collapse in Lower Manhattan, which the city still cannot determine the cause of, which was followed by another partial collapse of a different building right above an Amtrak train tunnel. You could even see right through the floor of that building to the trains below. It was terrifying. And if the problems at that building hadn't been reported at the last minute, there would have been another massive disaster on the city's hands. Yet although that partial collapse brought in a massive investigation covering every parking garage in town, which resulted in several shutdowns, the issues garages and old structures are facing may have more to do with what's underneath them than what they're made out of, as evidenced by recently collapsing sidewalks and homes that are falling down because of nearby construction projects leaving people homeless. And this has many residents terrified because somehow these unsafe construction projects were green-lit by our regulators, and now you've got generations of families with nowhere else to go. And that brings us to the real reason why this city is now exploding beneath our feet and falling down on top of us at the exact same time. This is what happens when you have 8 million people living in a decaying urban environment that nobody takes care of, which spells absolute disaster for many families living in old apartments that are on the brink of falling down, as well as those working in offices nearby massive construction projects that have little to no oversight. But although issues at construction projects have been a growing problem for years, the years of neglect that this city has experienced are now catching up with it as the very ground we walk on threatens to swallow us up. Well, I guess whatever happened here before probably won't happen again right there in this exact same spot. Oh man, that's crazy.
You see the scaffold?
Yeah, it didn't bring down the scaffolding, even though it's like about to fall in that hole right there. But the site of this recent sidewalk explosion is not out in the middle of nowhere. In fact, this happened across from this building and this Marriott Residences. And we are right in the middle of Midtown Manhattan, just down the street from Grand Central and the Chrysler Building. And you'd think this would be an area of town that people were keeping an eye on, but I guess not. But hopefully that changes, because as you're about to see, what happened right over here was pretty incredible.
Saw the smoke, heard the explosion, ran away.
Dave Singh works at the building. That is Dave highlighted in the middle of your screen. He's just steps away when the explosion goes off.
The whole ground shook. Everything shook.
Can you believe this? You're just walking down the sidewalk and then boom, this thing right here totally explodes. People interviewed the day this happened said it sounded like a bomb going off, and I bet it did. A pretty big hole was made right here. There was scaffolding all over the place at the time, which is gone, and the crazy part is nobody got hurt, which is kind of a miracle when you look at just how busy this part of town is and the fact that this is the entrance to a hotel where people live. And when the explosion happened, it was like shrapnel sending debris and trash and whatever was on the ground along with big chunks of the sidewalk itself up in the air. And it was all caught by this security camera right here. Now, when the explosion took place here, there was scaffolding everywhere, kind of like the massive amount of scaffolding we still have across the street where there was no explosion. Now, the reason that this is here is because buildings are required to do regular maintenance so that they don't fall down and hurt people, but nobody, I guess, is required to do regular maintenance on the ground we walk on, which, to be fair, shouldn't need a whole lot of it. But there's a lot going on beneath our feet in this city, and that explosion could have been a humanitarian disaster.
See, I started alerting the managers to get people out of the restaurant because the restaurant was right there.
New Yorkers ran to help, including Derek Pietri.
It wasn't heroic, but it was just a accurate instant for people's lives, you know.
So after the explosion ended up happening, people that were on this side of the street ran across the street to where it happened to see if anyone needed help. That's awesome. But although there are several theories over what may have caused this explosion, a definitive explanation has not been given to us. And you see how it says gas and there's another arrow pointing towards where the hole appeared? Well, it is thought that gas lines underneath here were leaking. There was a buildup of fumes underneath the sidewalk where you really don't have a whole lot of ventilation, and then something caused it to ignite. Now, I don't want to point any fingers, but these gas lines are pretty old. These buildings here are pretty old too, but down the street, one block actually away from here, there is a construction project. There's people doing welding, there's people jackhammering. Maybe something from that could have triggered something over here. But what's really frightening about this is since we don't know what caused the explosion, it could happen again, possibly putting members of the general public at risk either here or somewhere else. And there are others who think that, gee, you know, if the ground can explode and that can happen somehow and the city's not really keeping an eye on it, potentially that could be a red flag for bad actors who wish to do the city harm.
They, didn't bat an eye. They went right in, checked everywhere, made sure everyone was right. They did a great job, and luckily no one was injured today.
The FDNY says there is no structural damage. Other crews here on the scene working to try and figure out. So the good news is the fire department says that there is no structural damage, and they don't think any of the other buildings around here are affected by what happened across the street. But what's odd about this is that even with the prevailing theory being that there was some sort of gas leak right here, no one walking by on the sidewalk smelled gas or reported it. And the building here has a fully attended lobby. Somebody who's outside all the time is standing right here. They would have smelled something. Or perhaps with this happening outside and it being in an area next to cars that also emit fumes, nobody noticed. Either way, as unsettling as it is to realize that the ground beneath our feet could swallow us up at any moment, the type of disaster that could have happened right here is not the thing that New Yorkers should be most concerned about. So here we have a bunch of beautiful, charming old buildings, but they're so old and so charming that their structural integrity may not be what it used to be, and they could fall down at any moment. Not because their owners are neglecting them, no, far from it. But if anything were to come along and shake one of these places and cause unnecessary vibrations to the entire building, there could be a big problem.
We met Yvonne Bellardo in front of her 3-story home in Bushwick, Brooklyn. A week before, without warning, firefighters told her to get out. City inspectors had discovered the building next door was unstable and had to be demolished. On scene, we saw...
So the problem in New York City is that buildings here are so tightly backed together that if yours is fine, that's great. But if the one next door is a construction project or if it's not fine, that could cause issues for you. And if one place falls down, it could take the entire neighborhood with it. And in this story, you have a family who could lose a home that 3 generations of people are now living in, not because of problems problems where they live, but problems in a building that is 2 doors down. And this is a very sad story because one day they came home, walked up the stairs to their front door, and there was a vacate order slapped upon it, telling them that they could not go back in. It was put there by the fire department. And when the fire department bars you from entering a building, they mean business. You can actually be arrested if you go back in. And apparently these poor folks didn't even have time to pack. All their stuff is still inside, yet they can't go in, and they're worried. What do they have to do to save their home? Is there anything they can do? Well, as it turns out, they don't yet know if there's any way to save their home because city inspectors have now appeared after the disaster, not before, to say that, hey, gee, you know what? The building next to yours, that one is gonna have to come down. Its foundation is ruined, and we don't know if yours has to come down until that one does, making this a nightmare that could happen to just about anybody.
I understand there's nothing that can be done about saving that home, but then why don't you do all you can to make sure you save my home?
According to the Department of Buildings, the contractor dug too deep, contrary to approved documents, catastrophically damaging the neighbor's home.
So apparently this whole problem was caused by workers at that construction site down the street where they dug way too deep, beyond approved plans. I guess they were digging a hole and they thought, yeah, we could go a little deeper, no one's gonna know, but that caused a foundation collapse and brought down a whole building. And what's the point of these contractors going through the months of work required to get plans and get them approved and then to just not follow them? That's terrible. And now you have a family who has to pick up the pieces and may be homeless after this all ends. But this story gets even worse because even though the entire block may now be uninhabitable, the workers at that construction project, they can't do anything else now there, but they can still work on other construction projects elsewhere in the city, which means their reign of intelligence may not be over just yet.
This house right here, with a family who's been here for decades, was forced out and now has to live in a hotel.
And Fort Greene, same problem, different contractor. City inspectors found the contractor did work contrary to DOB approved plans, causing a partial collapse of a load-bearing shared wall. Now 2 months.
So this story is actually from the exact same news report. We've got buildings like this all over town, but in this second property, the contractor in question had a history of safety violations, yet somehow they're still out there with hammers and drills. And even though they had a long history of safety violations, they decided to expand upon that record. And apparently for 2 months, both buildings have been empty, one was occupied, and now a family has once again been displaced. Now, yes, they probably have homeowners insurance, but how far is that really going to go in a city where everything costs millions? You very well might get millions for your place, but you're not going to be able to replace your place. You might have to end up leaving the city entirely, all because of something that someone else did. And the worst part, it makes you wonder, how are these contractors, how are they able to cause so much destruction and just keep doing it? Like, what set of rules are they playing with that aren't actually rules?
Meantime, the DOB says when contractors cut corners, the department uses all tools at our disposal to hold these bad actors accountable. And while DOB can stop work on a site, the agency doesn't have the legal authority to prevent a contractor from working on a different site, no matter how many violations.
So apparently, if you do something wrong at one construction site, that just stops you there. There's no repercussion anywhere else. You don't lose your ability to create havoc in other places. And that also is a big problem because if you have multiple ongoing jobs and you're screwing them all up at once, you can cause disaster everywhere, revealing that there are very little checks and balances on the amount of destruction the wrong people could cause in this city. And apparently that's the case no matter how many violations these guys rack up, nothing will stop them. And this puts property all over the city at risk. But you know how these people probably keep getting jobs? Well, when they have a history of violations, they probably just lower their prices. And since these buildings are super old and super expensive, and since contractors are super expensive and landlords want to save money, it very well may be that their penny pinching causes the wrong people to get jobs over and over again. But when it comes to the wrong people getting jobs in this city, stupidity, unfortunately, is not limited to just private contractors. In fact, some of the work the local government here does will have your head spinning.
This video inside the Queens Midtown Tunnel shows water pouring down the ceiling, showing the severity of the leak that caused the tunnel to be shut down for hours as New York City and MTA authorities investigated.
So all the traffic out here, this is traffic on 2nd Avenue coming from the Queens Midtown Tunnel, which is just north of here. This is a major access point for Manhattan, and you'd think that the local government here, with their billions of dollars and their ability to oversee things, you'd think that they would have been on top of the people who were drilling on top of the tunnel through the roof, but they weren't. Apparently, the leak was so bad in that tunnel that they had to close the entire thing while they figured out how to repair it and while they figured out what went wrong, stranding people all over town. And if you think traffic in this city's bad on a day when the tunnel's working properly, you should have seen it the day that the tunnel was closed. Now, the hole in question that caused this disaster was only 2.5 inches in diameter, but apparently that was enough to let in torrents of water, because you've got a lot of water out there in the river, and with a large volume of water flowing through a hole of any size, it could quickly become a big disaster. However, people on Reddit, self-proclaimed experts, are saying not a big deal, it's small, it'll get fixed, but that doesn't answer the question as to why it was allowed to happen in the first place.
And the video shows even though the hole is only 2.5 inches, the force of the water in Wednesday's leak was intense.